Hey everybody, I'm Nick. Welcome back to the JAMSIONLINE YouTube channel. And a lot of you guys have been asking for a tour of our machine shop. So over the course of the next few videos in this series, we're going to talk you through all of the different machines that we use on a day-to-day basis and give you a detailed look on the operations of an automotive machine shop. So one of the first machines that my dad bought when he opened the machine shop in 1983 is our Peterson TCM25 valve guide and seat machine. We basically use this machine on a daily basis and have ever since we bought it for valve guide operations as well as machining our valve seats. We have since upgraded for our valve seat work, but we still use this machine a lot for valve guide work. We also use this machine for just various drilling operations, such as drilling out broken bolts or repairing strip threads with the helicoil. This machine has actually been used by 3 generations of Wolfram. When my dad was my age and he was first opening the shop, his dad would hang around and kind of help him out in the shop and actually did a lot of work for him. So Dad, do you have any stories about this machine and maybe Grandpa?
Well, I just remember one day Dad was just kind of hanging around here, probably just for the most part bothering me. But he's standing here and I'm trying to drill out some busted bolts. That's before we had the welder and had figured out the right way to take out broken studs. So I'm drilling one and the bit hangs up in it and it snaps that bit off while I'm working there. But he was standing there talking and must have had his mouth open, and just as that thing snaps, I hear him going start coughing and choking, and I'm like, what's the matter? He goes, a piece of that bit flew down my throat. Must not hurt him too bad. He lived to be 91.
Yeah. How old was he at the time?
Oh, he'd have probably been at least in his 80s, early 80s at that point, I suppose.
Yeah. That's funny. And I never really got to know my grandpa because he passed away before I was probably a year old or so. But it's still cool to me to know that my dad got to hang out with his dad in the shop, and I have a lot of fun hanging out with my dad in the shop too. I'm gonna cry. We've made a lot of different upgrades to this machine over the years. So if you went out and bought a Peterson TCM25 that just had no upgrades, it's gonna look a little bit different than this machine. One of the upgrades that we have made to this machine is to the air float table. The table that came with this machine in 1983 is a little bit different from this one. This one is a full 360-degree rollover table. The nice thing about this fixture is it's literally a 360-degree rollover. You can get to the bottom side, do work on the valve guides, then you can roll the head over and do your work on the valve seats all in one shot. You don't have to worry about flipping the head over or refixturing or anything like that. On top of the kind of rough adjust like you have there, you also have a fine adjust in both directions. So that'll allow you to really tune in your level in this rotational axis as well as your side-to-side axis, which will allow you to do things like cylinder heads like a big block Chevy that have canted valves. The downside to this table is that it's so heavy. So when you have a head like this, where it's a Subaru that has, you know, a really small 6mm valve guide, if you have your pilot in there and you're trying to center the table by floating the air, it's not only trying to center the weight of that cylinder head, it's trying to center the weight of a 500-pound table, which obviously, if you don't have a really rigid pilot, it's going to flex a little bit, and even if you do have a rigid pilot, it's probably going to flex. So that's where our new machine that we use does a lot better, and we'll touch on that in a later video. One of the features that this machine has is the ability to raise and lower the column relative to the work surface. So back in the day, if you wanted to do that, you had to walk around the back of the machine, and there was a hand crank on here that you would have to crank, and that would raise or lower the column. Obviously that gets pretty old, so Dad ended up putting a motor on it so that it's motorized, and we have a power feed for that. So now it's as simple as pushing one button to go up and pushing another button to go down. Along with raising and lowering the column, there are basically 2 clamps on this machine that you have to lock to hold the column in place. And back in the day, that was just these 2 handles that you had to reach over the machine and loosen and tighten by hand. The story goes, my dad had a gentleman working for him who was a little bit bigger than the average guy, and because his belly hung out so far, he couldn't reach over the machine to loosen those. So my dad had one of his customers who's an engineer, a really great customer of ours, designed this pneumatic cylinder operation with some switches that allows us to press the button, and when we press that button, you can see there that it loosens those handles automatically. One of the last things that my dad added is this linear scale here for a digital readout on the Z-axis of the spindle. And basically, if you guys do any machining, you know that that's nice to be able to see, you know, basically how deep you're drilling, or basically just where your spindle is relative to maybe a 0 point, or just kind of helps you know how far you've drilled or stuff like that. I can't, my words aren't coming up. So if any of you have used a TCM25, you know that it has a gearbox up here that allows you to change the spindle speed anywhere from 68 RPM all the way up to 1105 RPM, depending on which gear you've selected. But that doesn't give you any variability between those numbers. It's just set increments with those gears. So what we've actually done is we've gone and put a frequency drive on here, which allows us to basically select a gear range. So for instance, I'll put it on 1105 up here. So right now, if we're at full speed on the frequency drive, it runs 1,105 RPM. So what we have here is actually basically a knob here. It's basically a potentiometer that allows us to determine what speed we want to be at within that gear range. So obviously, if you left it on 1105 all the time, when you're on the lower range, you're not going to have enough torque. But if you go ahead and change the gear to 68 at full speed on the frequency drive, actually that's 346. If you change it to 68 at full speed on the frequency drive, we're at 68 RPM, but we can turn it down to, you know, anywhere down to 0 basically. And that's just really nice to have that there, so that if you're getting something where it's just chattering a little bit, and you just want to change the speed a little bit, you can just basically put your finger up there and just barely bump it, and you're not going to have to change the gears and all that. So just to give you guys an idea of how we center up on a valve guide or a seat to be able to do any work. Basically, every single cylinder head, well, not every single cylinder head, but there's just a wide range of different sizes of valve guide that you're going to have. So these are a 6mm guide, and we have, you know, just literally 20, 30 plus pilots here that allow us to get all of those different valve guide sizes. And the way this works is I take the tapered pilot and I basically shove it down into the valve guide there, and that sits tight so that we can then put our level on there. And obviously right now I'm way off, so I'll kind of bump it, and again, this is just kind of the rough adjustment. I kind of overdid it there. And then I'll lock the rough adjustment down there for the rollover, and then we go to our fine adjustment. So I release that, it's all airlock, and basically I can release that, and I can tilt the hand, or I can rotate the handle, and that basically tilts the table and gets us our fine adjustment. And I'll kind of watch here until that bubble is right in the center of the level. And if you want to get a view of that, then I'll check the other way, and obviously we're off just a little bit side to side, so I'll use this handle to basically lower this side of the table, and we're going to just basically work with it until we get dead nuts level, because if we're not dead nuts level, we're going to have issues doing our machining. Now, as of about a year ago, we have a new valve seat machine that we finish all of our valve seats on, but prior to that time, we finished all of our valve seats on this machine. So take the drill chuck out here, and basically this is the tooling that I used for about a year before we bought the Surdy valve seat machine, and it's basically a ball drive system. So this machine has a number 3 Morse taper, so we can put anything, any type of tool with that taper on it. And basically I would set up my cutter for the machine, and this is a Sunnin style tooling. We actually bought this from a guy on eBay, and it actually works pretty well compared to the old Myra tooling that we used to use. But with the pilot in there, with the head level, we put a bounce spring on it, and then you put the tooling on, and the tooling bounces, or the tooling rides on the pilot. That's how it gets centered on the valve guide, so that you cut a concentric seat. And then we have a 3-angle cutting insert here. So I'll just show you how that would work. Basically, again, this ball drive is going to mate to the spindle here with that tool that I've put in there. And We get on the air float with our pedal and move on over till we're close. And basically what I'm doing is I'm floating the air as I come down on that. And what that's doing is allowing the valve guide and the tooling to find it's allowing the tooling to find the center of that pilot. And this is where this machine does not do as well, because again, we have a little tiny 6mm pilot that we're trying to float 500 plus pounds on to find the center. So as you can imagine, it's not going to find the center as well, and when we start our machining, that 6mm pilot is going to tend to flex a little bit. All right, everybody, that concludes our video going over the TCM25 valve guide and seat machine that we use every day here in the machine shop. We hope that you've enjoyed, and we hope that you'll stay tuned for the next video in the series where we talk about the new and improved valve guide machine, our SERDI 4.5 that we've had less than a year. And this thing just does an amazing job. You've probably seen it in some of my other videos. But I just wanted to point out that we're still using the TCM25 even 38 years later after it's new. We still use it for certain things, and we reserve the SERDI for finishing our valve seats because that's really what it does best. So if you want to see the overview of that video, stay tuned for the next video in the series. Thanks for watching.